This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Before the launch of the S1II, I tried to keep my expectations as low as possible. I didn't want to allow the rumor sites to gaslight me into believing that the next camera from Lumix could possibly have a built-in electronic ND filter. So when this camera was finally revealed, I thought that this was just going to be another camera. You know, check the specs, shoot some sample footage, and then just move on to the next thing. But when I got back home, I started digging, playing with the settings, testing features that I didn't even expect to find. So I did some more research, and suddenly I realized that Lumix has been quietly packing their cameras with every tool I didn't know I was missing. So for that, I have to apologize to Lumix. Not that they care, but for as long as I've been testing cameras on YouTube, I've never considered them to be one of the big players. So I never even had the urge to test one. But the things that I have uncovered will probably shock you the same way it did to me. Things like focus transition. I can quickly choose between multiple focusing points, and the camera will automatically rack focus between those focusing points. Combining this with my slider and matching the timing, I'm able to maintain autofocus on a specific point regardless if I'm moving closer or farther away from whatever I'm shooting. Performing slides like this one are impossible with manual focus, and is always tough relying on the autofocus of cameras because they usually will pulse as you're coming closer and approaching or moving away from an object. And I've tested this with every single brand, or at least Sony, Canon, and Nikon. Things like shutter angle that keeps me from constantly recalculating my shutter speed when in between frame rates. And this is a feature that brands like Sony reserve for their cinema line. Things like open gate, where you're able to record the full sensor. I don't understand how Lumix is the only mirrorless system that is doing this right now, given how big vertical video is. Things like having a dirty HDMI. And what I mean by that is when you're recording to an external monitor, you can also still use your electronic viewfinder at the same time, so it doesn't disable anything. And on top of that, you're even able to record the audio regardless of what frame rate you're in. Lumix also gives you a bunch of anamorphic de-squeeze options and stabilization. There's just no other brand that I know of that can, mirrorless brand, that can compete with these kind of options. The ability to shoot 32-bit float audio. For my stationary studio setup, it's not much of an issue, but when I'm using a setup like I am right now, and I'm just kind of putting this all together on the fly, there's always room for a mistake to happen, and it's just nice not having to worry about clipping my audio. Okay, this right here is my normal speaking voice. Now we're gonna head on over to Mr. Gaston.
As a specimen, yes, I'm intimidating.
Okay, this right here is my normal speaking voice. Now this is Gaston.
As a specimen, yes, I'm intimidating.
Now for some quick housekeeping. Lumix did fly us out to Austin, Texas for a couple days to test out this camera. I was able to take the camera home to keep. Lumix has no input, nor do they get to see the video before publishing. And as with all my camera videos, I'm always going to point out any flaws if I find any. The S1II is rocking the same 24 megapixel semi-stacked sensor of the Z6 III. That means better rolling shutter performance than the S1R2 and even the S5 II. It also means that you can shoot up to 70 frames per second in RAW blackout free with autofocus and with pre-capture up to 1.5 seconds. 70 frames per second means that when something important is happening, you're going to capture every millisecond of that moment, especially when you can go back in time with pre-capture. In a single burst, you can shoot up to 180 photos, which equates to about 1.5 seconds until the buffer fills. That kid up there is going. Okay, so here's the catch. The buffer takes around 35 seconds to fully clear the 180 photos, and that's with either a CF Express card or an SD card. So depending on the type of sport that you're shooting or the type of action that you're shooting, that could be a deal breaker. But for baseball, for sports like baseball, I was perfectly fine. The action happens in spurts. I do think that this would have been a larger issue if the camera locked up while the buffer was trying to clear, but it doesn't. You can still take more photos while it's clearing up. You know, it's funny how different Nikon approached high frame rate burst shooting with this sensor. They give you 20 frames per second, but with a much deeper buffer. Lumix gives you more than 3 times the frame rate, but with a much smaller buffer. The Z6 III also gives you pre-capture, but only in JPEG. Lumix offers it in RAW. And there are not a lot of cameras out there that actually offer pre-capture in RAW. When shooting at the max burst speed, you are sacrificing a little bit of quality. You're shooting in 12-bit RAW. If you want to shoot 14-bit RAW files, the speed will drop to 60 frames per second. Now, here are some of the things that I didn't like shooting with the S1II for sports. Now, even though this is a partially stacked sensor, I can still see some warping at the fastest point of the action. And I'm talking the fastest point. For example, when the batter swings and where the bat meets the ball over home plate, this is where you start to see a little bit of warping on the bat, and sometimes the ball, depending on the velocity of the ball headed toward home. And this is definitely a nitpick considering that this camera is not marketed as a sports photography camera. Another thing I didn't like is that Lumix gives you a custom button option for damn near everything in this camera, but they don't have one for pre-capture, for turning it on and off. So I would have to use the mode dial on the top left to switch from pre-capture high speed to, let's say, just regular, you know, high speed or medium or single shot. And I wish there was one like on the Sony A1 II. You have that ability, because if I'm done taking photos using pre-capture and I want to take a couple of shots of someone reacting or someone throwing the bat or walking to the dugout, I want to be able to just take a couple of shots and not have to, you know, shoot 30 photos of the same thing happening, you know? I also wish that they gave us an option to drop the frames per second to, like, let's say 30 frames per second if that's all we felt like we needed. And that could also give us a little bit more headroom on the buffer. When reviewing back the images, I also noticed a weird exposure flicker that happened maybe 3 to 4 different times the entire afternoon. Now, this could be absolutely nothing, but let me know if you have ever seen something like this. The autofocus in the S1II is the same exact one that's in the S1R2, except for the addition of urban sports autofocus mode. Now, the one thing I've learned about the Lumix autofocus system is that it doesn't work out of the box like Sony and Canon. The adjustment that you make, like AF sensitivity, make a really big difference in how it performs, because according to Lumix, they wanted the camera out of the box to just be less jittery, less jumpy. So they tuned it to be a little bit more neutral, more chill out of the box. So it was a little bit of a learning curve for me. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I did not think that this camera's autofocus was going to be able to accurately track a moving subject at 70 frames per second, but it certainly can. I also understand that having a capable lens that can match that speed is also just as important. And when using the new 24-60 2.8 lens, it is actually unbelievable how good the tracking is, given that Lumix has never been or has never had the best reputation for its autofocus.
So I uploaded JPEGs to Capture One so that I could see in full detail how the tracking was behaving. So in this burst, I shot around 100 photos. And as soon as he starts to grind the rail, that's when you notice that the focus quickly jumps to the background, and then it stays there for about 5 shots until it locks on again and stayed on him until the end when he eventually jumped out of frame. Here's another example. I shot around 40 images in this burst when he jumped over the stairs, and just look how fast he was coming. This is tough for any camera. So in Capture One, I counted 10 photos out of the 40 were out of focus. Lumix told me that this camera has the same exact autofocus as the one in the S1II. My experience with that camera in burst mode was much different than this one at 40 frames per second. But then again, I never tried set 3 mode on that camera, so I may have to retest. When I got back home from Austin, I took the Lumix S1II to the ballpark to shoot some professional baseball. The skate park is one thing, but this is the kind of environment right here that's really going to expose a lot of the quirks of the autofocus system. When I was using full area autofocus, it wasn't surprising to me that this is when it struggled the most. Now, when I'm shooting with either Sony, Canon, or Nikon in wide area, it's often going to try to focus on the crowd behind the player. But one thing is about the Lumix system that I noticed is that the subject detection is so aggressive that even if it identifies the batter and I'm half pressing the shutter, it's still gonna want to jump to either the umpire, the catcher, or someone in the background. So it's much more aggressive than the other ones from my experience. Switching over to zone or one area were the AF modes that worked best for baseball. In some cases, they would still want to back focus, even though the player is clearly the focusing point when I was using zone. So I kept it in one area plus. For the majority of the time, I had the highest hit rate and the most consistent performance. Still, in random moments, I found that the autofocus would pulse from time to time. At first, I thought it was because I was zooming in or out while I was shooting, but then I noticed that it happened sometimes when I wasn't zooming the lens. If you were to ask me where Lumix stands with autofocus compared to the other brands, overall, I think that they're definitely 4th place behind Nikon, but I have to give credit where credit is due. There is no other camera that can shoot 70 FPS in RAW that doesn't have a global shutter and has the tracking ability at this insane speed. It really had me shook, still has me shook. There is no, like, this is not in any way marketed as a sports camera. You're probably watching this right now with zero intention of ever using a camera like this for sports. So even though the buffer is absolute trash, I'm gonna have to give Lumix a dub on this one.
Now for video, this is where this camera really shines, but also where it gets really overwhelming. With brands like Sony, you don't get nowhere near this many options of frame rates and aspect ratios. In this camera, you get up to 5.8K Apple ProRes RAW with pages and pages of different options, frame rates, codecs. In 3x2 open gate, you can shoot both 6K and 5.1K in 420 10-bit. You have a ton of different options up to 6K 60p and 4K 120p for full frame 16:9. You got options for DCI 4K and cinematic widescreen. Unlike the S1R2, you do get 240 frames per second in 1080p, but with no subject detection in these modes. This also goes for the 4K 120 modes as well. Now, when you are shooting 4K 120, there is a slight crop of 1.24 and 1.17 when you're shooting the Cinema 4K. Almost all the modes are downsampled, except for the 4K 120 and the 240, if I remember correctly. Now, for those who care about rolling shutter and Basing these numbers off of the Z6 III, since they have the same sensor, the 6K 60, 50, 30, 25, 24p, you're getting approximately 9.33 milliseconds readout time, which is amazing. 4K 120, 4K 100, approximately 6.1 milliseconds, which is actually better than the FX3 A7S III sensor at 4K 120, which is very, very good. When you're shooting 4K 60, 50, 30, 25, 24, the same 9.33 millisecond. In 1080, 240, 200, 2.76 millisecond readout time. Now, I will say that when I was at Wrigley Field, on the first base side and the players were running to first, I was at around 85 millimeter on my lens and running full speed at 6K 60, 6K 30, there was a little bit of the rolling shutter effect happening. When I was shooting at 4K 120, 95, 1080, 240p, there was virtually no rolling shutter. This camera has a dual native ISO of 640 and 5000, which I really like that 5000. It's a sweet spot. When dynamic range boost is off, you get 14 stops. Dynamic range boost on, you get 15 stops. Now, this camera will also be receiving an RE log update in the near future. I do wish that it came out with this camera out of the box. I think that it would have made this launch more impactful because there are just no other full frame cameras that have anything like this. And the S1II has some of the best image stabilization out of any full frame camera. You get up to 8 stops of IBIS. Just check out this clip that I shot in standard mode, handheld, with the 70-200 f4. You also have options like active IS. You have the cropless mode, the EIS for when you're shooting anamorphic, and then you also have boost IS for those tripod-like shots. And I accidentally turned that on a couple times to pan and it was a mess, so don't use boost IS for anything moving. The ergonomics of this camera, it's got the same exact body as the S1R2. Same 5.76 million dot EVF. The same 3-inch 4-angle touchscreen. The shutter closes instantly when the camera is shut off, which I like. But some of the things that I don't like about the body, the battery door compartment on both cameras, it creaks. I also think that the 4-way screen on this camera, although I love the mechanism, I do think that the screen is a little too small. It's not bright enough most of the time, and I don't know, I feel like the quality isn't as good as other cameras that I use.
And the biggest flaw, in my opinion, is the battery life. Out of all the cameras that I use, I feel like the S1R2 and the S1II have the worst battery life.
Before I get into my final thoughts, I want to send a massive shout out to Squarespace for making this video possible. Squarespace makes it super easy to build out your own website, blog, or even online store. You can quickly grab your own custom domain and create a professional looking website. The best part, you don't need any coding or graphic design skills. If you have any questions, they have 24/7 customer support. One really cool feature is called Design Intelligence, which uses AI to help you create a site that's totally unique to you. Plus, Squarespace SEO feature makes your site easy to find and performs well. If you've got a side hustle or you want to start one, you can start an online store like I did and earn some passive income while you sleep. Use the coupon code Manny for 10% off your first purchase. The link will be down in the description.
Now, for my final thoughts, I think that this camera can hold its own as a stills camera, but this is still 100% a video camera first. I think that is where it really justifies its price. Now, speaking about price, I looked on Amazon recently, a couple days ago, and the Nikon Z6 III got a price cut to $2,100. That's tough. It's almost like Nikon's trolling, because that is one hell of a deal for a camera with the sensor like this. On the video side, you just get so much more with the S1II. This thing is stacked. This is like back in the Android and iPhone days, maybe 10 years ago, where Android gave you all these cool features, but if you didn't use the features, then there was no point, right? And it just depends on if you could make use of all of the features that, you know, the ones that I mentioned in the beginning. And there are many others that I didn't mention. See, for me personally, just for the audio alone, it's worth it for me, right? So look, this entire video, the audio, when I was speaking with my nice little setup, the audio was trash because on the Sony XLR, I got the settings wrong and I had to try to recover and fix the audio in post. And that's what happens. Filming yourself, it always poses a challenge with getting your settings right. And being able to just set it and forget about it is huge for me. So I really, really am looking forward to just, you know, being able to shoot my audio with this XLR, the 32-bit float. And again, that's huge for me. Another thing that's huge for me is, you know, I'm trying to get more into anamorphics and not needing an external screen like my Sonys need to de-squeeze the footage is huge for me. I do have the FX30. The FX30, the anamorphic tools are extremely limited. And there's just no other camera that can give me that. And I can go on and on because there's a ton of other features that I can see myself using on the video side. For video, this makes so much sense. And all the things that in our little echo chamber of the Sony, you know, Canon community, all the things that we've been wanting, all the things that Sony gatekeeps for their cinema line, which, I mean, I understand that's the way they've been structuring things. This camera gives you all of it, right? I love the A7S III still to this day because it has an electronic viewfinder. I love having one of those for exposure, whether I'm doing photo or video. And that's why I don't use the FX30 for the most part on location, because I don't want to have to use a monitor. I like an EVF. This camera gives you all of that bunched into one body. So it just depends on who you are and is it worth it, because that Z6 III price is low. But remember, it's more than just camera body versus camera body. Now you're looking at the ecosystem. And so there's just a lot to take into account there. It depends on what you need, right? In terms of flaws, I mean, I say the biggest flaws is the battery life. One, the battery life is really atrocious on this camera, and the buffer on the, you know, on the photo side, which, I mean, I understand this camera is not meant to be a professional sports tool, but the buffer is pretty terrible, to be fair. Now, yeah, I mean, I think I always, whenever I talk about stuff like this, I feel a lot of pressure on me. I have like an angel and then a demon on each side of my shoulder. And I'm always thinking about, always trying to balance out the good and the bad. And for this one, this is a tough one. These cameras are so damn feature packed that it's pretty jarring to approach it and really try to go tit for tat with another camera. So I'm gonna just end it here. Hopefully, I was trying to keep this video and just talk about the things that matter to me. Of course, I had FOMO. Now I have to talk about every single thing or try to cover everything. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time in the camera world, man. Let me tell you. I'm out of here.